Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and here's what we have in store for you this evening. Unionized workers at SARS have embarked on an indefinite strike. This after they rejected a 1.39% wage increase offer. They are demanding a 12% increase across the board. SARS has refused to budge, saying the demand is simply unaffordable until it receives further funding from the fiscus. SARS Commissioner Edward Kisweta is our first guest this evening. South Africa's economic woes continue to pile on, driving up the price of food and other essentials. Trade Union Federation SAFTU, Independent Union GIWUSA, and the Cost of Living Crisis Committee have clubbed together to form the nucleus of what they call the Working Class Fight Back campaign. They're going to tell us what that is all about. We also focus on the state of Gauteng municipalities with the province's COGTA MEC Lebohang Maile. The Watchdog starts now. Workers affiliated to the PSA and the HAU are at loggerheads with management over a salary increment. SARS says it simply cannot afford to accede to the demands being made by the workers unless it receives more money. To discuss the impact of the strike on the running of SARS, we're now joined by SARS Commissioner Edward Kisweta. Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you so much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Long time no speak. Let's start with an appraisal from you of just this, how the situation is or was today, which parts of your operations were affected, how seriously, and obviously the impact that has had on taxpayers.
Certainly. I would like, however, just to be clear that it is not SARS refusing to budge. SARS is unable, as you quite rightly pointed out, for the fact that SARS does not allocate its own funding. It receives funding from Treasury. And you know, Vuyo, the disappointing thing for me this year is that it is the second year running where we have been totally transparent with union leaders, including the national leadership of both unions, in terms of our funding constraints, and we've been totally transparent with how much money we have available towards once-off gratuity payments for the performance of last year, plus what we have to allocate towards salary increases. So there's no new or no different story for anyone to suggest, therefore, that we are being playing games or we are stuck and unresponsive is mischievous. That notwithstanding, we are where we are. And let me start by saying any adverse impact on service is regrettable. And I want to first, to all the taxpayers who in the last few days have experienced that they have had an interruption in a call or a call that was dropped, or they've arrived at a SARS office and found that its doors were closed, I would like to extend an unreserved apology for that experience. Our call volumes have been at average about 30,000 a day, and it's just impossible for us, given our own resource constraints, as well as the impact of the strike. We have about a third of our staff on strike, and of that, about 50% are in frontline service areas, which is either they are in a branch office or they are in a contact center receiving and attending to incoming calls by taxpayers. And so we have not been able to service the 30,000 calls, and unfortunately, we apologize to taxpayers for that. In terms of our branches, we have decided proactively as a risk management to close some of our branches where we felt there was potential for a confrontation between taxpayers and our own striking workers, particularly on sidewalks where taxpayers would queue when they arrive at our offices without an appointment. So it was really as a risk management that we did that. However, every single taxpayer still has access to SARS services that we make available on our e-filing and Mobi app platforms. We also have, through an appointment system, are able to provide interviews to taxpayers on a virtual platform. What that means is a taxpayer can resolve any outstanding matter with SARS through a video call or through a voice call, and that work continues. But I think in terms of the impact, and unfortunately, you know, good news have a way of getting lost and bad news have a way of making the headlines. So what I can say to you is that since the start of filing season this year, we have already seen 3.4 million taxpayers who have been assessed. Of that, just over 2.4 million, 2.7 million have been part of this auto-assessment population. And an auto-assessment is where a taxpayer is able to receive an assessment outcome from SARS where you deploy purely data, technology, and artificial intelligence to produce an assessment outcome for taxpayers. And then we've also had, in the first 10 days, 700,000 taxpayers who have actually submitted their returns on our e-filing platforms. And for us, that's good news. Let me also say what the impact of that has been and the benefit. At a time when we accept that every South African is financially stressed, we were able to resolve 1.1 million instances of refunds, and that results in the payment of 7.1 billion of rand that have found its way back into the pockets of taxpayers just in the last 10 days since we started e-filing. That is, if you compare that with last year in the same period, we resolved just over 400,000 as opposed to the 1.1 million now, and we paid out 4.9 billion rand. So we are extremely encouraged that we have been able to positively impact the lives of significantly more taxpayers. And this has only been made possible because the progress we've made in terms of our journey towards modernization in pursuit of our vision to become a smart, modern SARS. What that also means is that the impact of the strike is minimal. It means that we can still continue to serve our taxpayers through the various alternative channels other than branch walk-ins. We've only had 5,000 branch walk-ins since the beginning of 40,000 e-booking appointments through the virtual channels and 5,000 in-person branch appointments since the 1st of July. And that's really encouraging for us. So the journey to migrate more and more taxpayers onto our digital platforms, the deployment of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, are all beginning to bear fruit. Now let me just come back to the strike. It is therefore unfortunate that unions still think that a strike is the most effective way to engage with us. Given the fact that this is not of my own making, that I'm reliant on funding allocation, and given the fact that we've expressed a willingness to work with our trade union leaders to improve the overall value proposition to our staff, it is rather disappointing that they feel that the traditional form of withholding their labor is going to have a real impact.
But I mean, isn't that in the nature of things, that when workers are not happy and they don't seem to be making headways during negotiations, the weapon of last resort is withdrawing their labor.
And I think historically, and in many industries, that still applies. I have reached out to our trade union leaders when I restarted at SARS 3 years ago. I said to them, here is what's going to happen. Increasingly, our modernization will automate routine work. It will disintermediate a lot of the manual processing. What are we going to do with our people? Why don't you work with me so that we can upskill our people, give them better skills, make them more valuable to us, and as a consequence of that, their overall remuneration will improve.
Has there been resistance to that?
Well, right now we could be sitting around the table with trade unions talking about that instead of being on a strike. And that's the unfortunate situation. We have now, tomorrow we will deploy 150 temporary contact center agents to try and bring some relief. We are in the process of bringing on board over the next 12 months 250 additional service consultants, but a new breed of service consultants that is a significant departure from our current. Many of our staff who have been there for years, they have become used to the old way of working. And this is a message for all employers. We have to take our staff along with us as we modernize our processes and as we work towards a completely different world of work. Let me share with you some data points. At the start of COVID, only 10% of our people were enabled to work remotely. Today, that number is more than 90%. At the start of COVID, within the first 100 days, we built and deployed an additional 45 additional digital applications to make more of our work, enable more of our taxpayers to resolve their matters online. The 2.7 million taxpayers or 3.4 million taxpayers, of which a significant component have been through the auto assessment, is another advancement that makes life easier for taxpayers deploying technology and data. Unless we sit around the table and work at a really, really faster pace than what we currently have been able to do to upskill and evolve our workforce to be future-proofed, I am afraid South Africa's problem of unemployability of our workforce will get worse. If you open every newspaper, it's not, of course we have a job shortage, but for many of the jobs that we have, our people need to be made ready, they need to be upskilled, they need to evolve. And my plea to union leadership is we need a different model of engagement than this war of attrition where we try and wear each other down and in the end everyone loses. That model, I would be bold enough to say, is a model of yesteryear. It will not work in the future.
Well, I don't think anyone will disagree with you or take issue with you. I think the benefits or impacts of your e-filing, the auto assessments you spoke about earlier, are being or have been felt by taxpayers generally. So you probably have them on your side. But I think where, for example, let's say you bring in people who are then going to do the work of the striking workers, isn't that tantamount to basically bring people who are going to cross the picket line, and that then putting you in an even more confrontational situation with your workforce, who may see you as basically, thumping your nose?
I'm glad you asked that question because it allows me to set the record straight. These initiatives to train additional contact center agents and to bring on board over the next 12 months additional service consultants is not because of the strike. It is driven because of a staff shortage that we have had. For 5, almost 6 years, we were unable to recruit any staff because of budget constraints. Last year, for the first time, Treasury gave additional money to fill those vacancies, and we have begun in earnest. So I want to be very clear. These initiatives just happen to coincide. You don't, for me to say to you that we are able to deploy 150 additional contact center agents, I couldn't have dreamt that up last week. We've started that process months ago. We've started the defining a different career path, a different model for service consultants more than a year ago. And so it just is fortuitous for us that the harvesting of that benefit coincides with the taxpayers. But at the end of the day, everyone will decide whether our bona fides are above board or not. What I can tell you is whatever I've shared with you now, I can do so in good conscience without any fear of contradiction. I want to come back to my original point. I invite our trade unions leaders to sit around the table and to honestly and earnestly say, what is the best way to improve the overall employee value proposition so that our employees do not become irrelevant in this process of modernization of the workplace?
Couple of quick ones, Commissioner. We have run out of time. One is, you said at the beginning that you're not playing games, you're not being mischievous, and you have been transparent with the workers. In other words, what is happening now, or where things are, the situation is beyond your control because you are acting within, you have to make do with what you have, and the situation is beyond your control. What does that mean then going forward? Is that you saying there is nothing whatsoever that you can do right now, and the workers you are dealing with should understand it because you've played open cards with them, you've put the numbers out there, and they should be able to see, or should have seen, that the situation is really beyond your control? Is that what you're saying?
Whether they understand or accept that is not for me to say. But here is what I can say without fear of contradiction. One, I have been very transparent in my communication to our trade unions that we are allocated our funding. We then took the funding, I did this by the way last year as well, and said, this is about what we have, circa between 10 and 11 billion between last year and this year. Some of that money, about $1 billion, was earmarked for vacancies and specific modernization projects. You know, Vuyo, about more than 8 billion of the 10 billion is for staffing. Our salary bill is significantly high. A 5% increase on the bill of 8 billion rand is another 400 million rand that I just don't have. I will be breaking the PFMA and regulations that I am supposed to work with if I spend money that I don't have. So whether or not trade unions understand or accept that, I cannot say. But what I can say is we have communicated that consistently and transparently to them. Why they choose to ignore that, they will have to explain why they choose to in fact embark on a strike. If we were an organization, you know, when I was a CEO of a listed company, I have a lot more room to negotiate because I am perfectly empowered by my board, subject to factors of affordability and other factors to decide how much I want to allocate to salaries. Unfortunately, in this case, I and every other Director General in a department of government are allocated funding, and they have to live within their means.
Quickly, last one, perhaps it's at a personal level. The conversation I'm having next is about the stresses that everyone is under, you know, the rising costs of food, of transportation, and all that goes with that. Do you not, at the very least, understand what is driving these workers? That the cost of living keeps going up, and they have nowhere else to tend to. And I mean, I was reading earlier some anecdotal, examples of people. Someone was talking about a cousin who has had to resign because what they take home is simply less than, what they earn. So they've just had to drop the job.
Absolutely, I empathize. My own family find themselves in a similar situation where they are battling to make ends meet. And so it is not as if I'm disconnected or insensitive to that. Let me tell you before I talk to our own employees, when I walk, and I did in the last few weeks since the beginning of filing season, visit some of our branches, I walk the queues, I engage with taxpayers on the ground. And I ask many of them, why are you even in the queue? You shouldn't be here. You're not required to file. You know what they say? I stopped working for the last 3 years, but I've come today just hoping that there may be some money for me. I look into the eyes of that father or the mother, and I want to cry because I know this is the reality that they face. Many South Africans, 7 out of every 10 young people are unemployed. The rising cost exacerbated by the standoff between the powers in the world, by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. All of these things have driven inflationary pressures, fuel, food, cost of living. I don't know. This is the one time I wish I had a magic wand.
Okay.
Coming to our own employees, we are still fortunate. We have job security. We have work. Last month, every SARS employee received a gratuity bonus. Whilst I understand their pressures, we are significantly more blessed than many of our fellow South Africans.
Edward Kiswatsha, let me thank you for your time this evening. He is, of course, the SARS commissioner, talking to us about that strike, by how and are the unions currently affecting SARS. We'll see how that situation pans out. After the break, I speak to a group of organizations, unions that have clubbed together to form the nucleus of what they call the Working Class Fight Back campaign. They're going to tell us what that is all about. Well, food and energy prices have risen to their highest level in decades. This is coupled with the rising cost of inflation that continues to push up the cost of living in South Africa. Trade Union Federation SAFTU, Independent Union GIWUSA, and the Cost of Living Crisis Committee are joining forces for what they call the Working Class Fight Back campaign. What is that all about? Well, joining us now, we have Ruth Ntlogotse, who is the president of SAFTU, Ferron Pedro from the Cost of Living Crisis Committee, and Metlwe Sibei, who is the president of GIWUSA. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation.
Thank you.
I think the facts are out there. I mean, some of them I was canvassing now with the SARS commissioner as we were ending that conversation about the strike that's going on at SARS. Everyone is feeling the pinch. But I guess what I wanted to ask, the point of this conversation was that is the difference you think a campaign of this nature will make. If I may start with you, Ruth. Ruth, can you hear me? Okay.
Hello, Vuyo.
I'm saying, again? What difference do you think a campaign of this nature is going to make?
Vuyo, thank you so much for inviting us as SAFTU. When I was listening to the commissioner, I felt very, very much bad, considering the cost of living, how the working class and the poor are feeling the pinch. If you can look at the food basket, it has increased by about 14%. For an example, the price of mealie meal, June 2021, it was around 241, and now it's seated at around 268. And look at the price of petrol. I mean, last week we woke up with the increased price of petrol. paraffin, just to mention a few, and you listen to an employer who is not, who does not want to budge and feel the pinch that his employees are feeling. So we are saying as SAFTU, because of this is a national phenomenon, almost everyone is feeling the pinch. We are saying that we need to unite. We've been fighting in silos. We are saying that it's high time that we need to join forces, all of us, especially those who are affected by this pandemic. We are calling for the National Working Class Summit on the first week of August, where all organizations, we invited all those that are associated to the left, political parties, the NGOs. We are saying that enough is enough. We cannot just fold our hands and pretend as if like it's business as usual. We are saying that let's unite and come up with a program of action. From the SAFTU National Executive Committee, we've decided on the National Day of Action, which will be the 24th of August. That's the day that we'll be proposing to that National Working Class Summit, so that we bring this economy of the country to a standstill. Because of it cannot be that the prices of petrol are increasing, and there's absolutely nothing that the government of this country is doing. So we are saying that let's join forces so that we put more pressure on the government of this country.
I mean, Theron, that in fact what Ruth has just said, I mean, goes to the heart of will, in my view, determine whether or not a campaign of this nature will be successful. We're talking about SAFTU, that is one among how many? 4 federations.
Yes.
Right? So unity is crucial. And even if you decide, say, to go it alone, the impact is going to be seriously compromised. So to what extent are you prepared to not only call upon everyone to join you, but to actually make very real efforts to get the commitment of everyone? And I'm talking here just about the worker federations, even before we go to NGOs and civil society organizations and everyone else. Have you thought around that?
Yes, I mean, that's the reason that, I mean, from our point of view as KIUSA, we've engaged with SAFTU, which is our federation, and you know, I think the president has spoken to the NEC resolution that commit the entire federation. We have initiated a cost of living campaign to which, you know, Comrade Ferron also, you know, belong and coordinate. And I think what we are seeking to do is to bring together workers, not only in the organized labor movement, but also millions of young people, you know, that are unemployed, you know, people that are in community civics, people that are organized in youth movements, people that are organized in number of movements of our people that have been fighting in their own, this crisis, which is really a crisis of survival. Because just if you, I mean, you know, take the food basket that, you know, President Ruth is speaking about. I mean, that food basket has grown by about 14%, to, you know, something like 4,688. This in a country where the minimum wage is about 3,085, 3,800 and something rand, right? Which is an earnings of about 60% of the workers. So that means the household food basket is actually in excess of the minimum wage or the wages of about 60% of the workers, and these are families that belong to the lowest income groups, which are said to be spending over 50% of their income on food. They're spending about, you know, 36% of their income on transport, which has increased as well by between 20 to 35% according to National Tax Alliance. And you know, I can go on and on. The remainder is on household utility, including energy, which, if you consider, I mean, the price of petrol alone, 93 unleaded, right? Last year was about 52% less than what it is this year, and the price has increased by 72% since 2020. This is a crisis of survival for many working class people, and we are saying that this is an opportunity for us to fight back, because otherwise we are going to be plunged into levels of poverty and extreme hunger that brought us on barbarism.
I mean, what could those in power, or that will be calling upon to act, have done What could they have done that which they have hitherto not done?
Well, the fact is that the ANC government have fully endorsed a neoliberal austerity program. So their aim is to reduce public spending as much as possible and have our lives organized primarily by the private sector and the market. And we're saying, as the cost of living crisis campaign, that we need increased social services. We need to put an end to austerity. We need affordable housing. And we need to make sure that there's a moratorium on evictions. We should not have any evictions in this period. We need to make sure that prices are regulated, and government has the means to do that. Make sure that there's no price gouging. We need to make sure that we move from we invest in public services like transportation, but also we end load shedding by really investing in a just transition from coal and fossil fuel to renewable energy, but that takes into account jobs and communities and make sure that we bring everybody along. These are the kinds of initiatives that if we had a government that was really committed to the interests of the working class and ordinary South Africans, then we would we wouldn't be in this crisis. We wouldn't be in the crisis that we're now. Many times, and I heard your previous speaker, the commissioner, the SARS commissioner, speaking about the fact that there are no alternatives. That is a common lie that the ruling class and people in power say. But there are alternatives. 10% of the South African population own 90% of the wealth. That means that 90% of what should belong to everybody in South Africa is in private hands. Why? Why can it not be in public hands? Why can these things not be social goods? It's simply a matter of political will and ideological commitment. And this government is committed to capitalism, it's committed to neoliberalism, it's committed to austerity, and not the interests of the majority of people in this country.
Ruth, I mean, outside of the sort of broad trade union movement, who else do you see as critical allies if this campaign is really going to be able to do what you think it can do?
Coming from our recent National Congress, the Congress was very much firm that we need to work with the trade union federations. And we were given a marching order that we must make sure that we work closer to them. And I think in the past, that was 2020, in the COSATU campaigns, we joined their campaign, and there was a letter written to COSATU, a federation, where we wanted a collaboration with them. And recently, there was also an extension of where the COSATU, FEDUSA, and NACTU, there were some discussions as to how best we can be able to make sure that we unite on a unity program. So what we're intending to do, we are intending to walk this path together with other trade union federation. And not only them, even the political parties that are aligned to the left. I think there are clear requirements that we agreed upon, that while we travel this journey, we're not going to leave anyone behind, especially those who are committed in terms of fighting the plight of the working class and the poor. So our mission is centered around how do we make sure that as workers, because as workers we are exploited irrespective of the logo of the trade union, the federation that we are coming from. As workers, if you can look at what is currently happening there at SARS, it's workers from PSA, it's workers from NEHAU. All of them, they're exploited by the SARS. So unity of workers, we saw it in ESCOM. I mean, ESCOM recently, NUMSA and NUM, together with Solidarity, they work collaboratively. There was a collaborative effort, and we saw the agreement that they've just recently struck. So hence we are saying that as SABC, we need to make sure that we extend our hand and work with other trade union federation, because at the end of the day, we are all exploited as workers.
Theron, I mean, have you thought of maybe some of the things that could put a spanner in the works? In other words, that could prevent this campaign from even taking off, let alone?
No, well, I mean, the fact that we are, having SABC that is making a call for a national shutdown in August. That means, we have, breached an important milestone. SAFTU organizes hundreds of thousands of workers in the private sector, in the public sector, and across the economy. We are convening a working class summit process, which involved community civics, which involved various movements of the working class people in this country. And we are saying that we want this crisis to be resolved in the interest of the working class. The reality is that the ANC government and their policies have been, facilitating a massive transfer of wealth from the working class into the rich. And the reality is, this crisis is not a natural calamity. It's a culmination.
It's precisely the reason I'm asking you was, if you look at the board membership of the ANC, these are working class people. It's poor people, but you haven't seen them, rising against, their own government. In other words, doing what they're supposed to do as branch and, and other activists of the organization, which is why I was asking the question as to, have you thought of the sort of things that could actually make this campaign not to work or not to be as effective as you guys would want it to be?
The ANC has been hollowed out insofar as the working class concerned. Its branches are empty bureaucratic structures of careerists and all sorts of corrupt individuals, right, that are seeking power, that are seeking to plunder the public service for their own enrichment. The reality is that the working class has been revolting against the ANC. You look at all the main theaters of the struggles in this country. On the industrial plane, in campuses, you had fist must fall. In communities, there's a permanent state of working class community revolved around the issues of service delivery, around the issues of growing food hunger. How else do you characterize the July unrest of last year, if not the food riot of the poor? Some of them would have been the members of the ANC, but the reality is that they are hungry and they need an alternative. And this is what we are trying to organize. The reality is, the ANC has to go at some point. And I think as an organized working class, we need to be able to provide a strategy, a campaign, but also, and above all, a political alternative to say, how do we take ANC out of power? It's a matter of yesterday. We can't wait forever.
I see you're nodding there when you talk about how to create an alternative. What are your thoughts? What alternative are you talking about? Where do you even begin? In other words, beyond this campaign, mobilizing for that alternative, which hopefully or presumably will give a permanence to the sort of needs and solutions to the needs that you're talking about.
Right. At the beginning, you asked Comrade Ruth, the president of SAFTU, about the aims of the campaign or what we see it ultimately achieving. And this campaign really, because we're on this powder keg, we saw it as Comrade Sebe spoke about the July unrest, we're on a powder keg with the number of young people that are unemployed in this country that you mentioned. It's just, this is not a feasible, sustainable situation. And not to mention, the climate crisis and various environmental disasters that are looming. So what we need is a fundamental restructuring of the economy, fundamental restructuring of society, and that will mean that working class people, poor people, unemployed people need to take back power as much as they can, perhaps in increments. So we'll start off with a day of action to say, actually, this country can't run without us. This country can't run without our work and our labor, our contribution. That's all that's needed for the country to run, really, is our work and our labor. Mostly people who own the wealth are not doing much at all. And so we're saying we shut down the economy. We say this is our power. We show the working class what their power is through that kind of shutdown. And then that should build, we hope, into rolling mass actions, occupations, resistance to evictions, resistance strikes, resistance to wage cuts and retrenchments. And in that way, the working class takes back power more and more every day. And we can see that kind of fundamental restructuring of society.
Okay, we'll see how that pans out. Let me thank all of you. Well, you've heard it, a national summit is being planned, whereafter on the 24th of August there may be that day of action. Of course, all of that depends on how successful these parties who currently form the nucleus of this initiative take things forward. After the break, we talk about local government.
Lockdown was a very difficult period for us, and during that time I was unfairly dismissed. Clientele Legal took my matter all the way to the CCMA, and it was settled in my favor.
Clientele Legal has been the name you trust for more than 10 years. We provide professional legal services and advice at a fraction of the price you would pay to a private lawyer.
Clientele Legal assisted me with a very sensitive family matter. My lawyer would call me after 8 p.m, at 10 p.m, just to make sure that I was okay and just to make sure that things went smooth.
We cover a wide range of civil, criminal, and labor-related matters. This includes protection for unfair labor practices, debt-related issues, and uncontested divorces.
A company owed me 345,000 rand, and Clientele Legal got my money back.
Professional lawyers, professional advice at an affordable price. SMS lawyer to 48523 and we'll call you back.
Now this is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences.
As journalists, we have responsibilities, to observe ethics, to be truthful, to be factual.
Our business and work as journalists has remained the same, that we want to tell stories, we want to be factual.
We are so good to can identify problems, criticize our media, and we don't encourage the issue of ethical reporting, that the media have limitations.
Watch Media and Society, Sundays, 9 a.m. with me, Naledi Muleo, on the SABC News Channel.
In her most recent report, the Auditor General called on municipal leaders to transform local government to improve people's lives and play their parts, or respective parts, I should say, to ensure accountability for government spending, improve service delivery, and the quality of life of South Africans. Tonight, we focus on the state of Gauteng municipalities. They got a briefing today from the Office of the Auditor General about the state of affairs in Gauteng. And not too long ago, the provincial COCTA MEC, Lebohang Maile, bemoaned the fact that accountability continues to be a problem, and people really, there's no consequence management, broadly speaking. Well, he is my guest today on the back of that briefing that the province got from the Office of the Auditor General. Good evening, sir, and thank you very much for your time.
Evening, Bravoyo, and thanks for having us. We also like to greet the viewers at home.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the, what the Office of the Auditor General said, today about, municipalities, which municipality got what and how many and so on. The real reason I wanted us to go back to this conversation was, as I was saying earlier, on the back of some of the things you said some months ago when you did an appraisal of the state of municipalities in the province. And in very broad and general terms, the Office of the Auditor General found that on the back of their audits that there's been a decline in audit outcomes for Gauteng municipalities. And I remember you saying that there is pointing out some of the difficulties that someone like you as an MEC of COCTA has. In other words, how you are unable in so many respects to actually make sure that people do account for their actions, or there are consequences for those who don't do their respective jobs.
I think the starting point is that the municipalities are an autonomous sphere of government, And the Constitution of the Republic clearly states that the executive and legislative authority of a municipality rests with the council. And it further states that both provincial and national government have got the responsibility to play oversight role, coordinate, and provide support. So the responsibility to ensure that there is accountability and there's consequence management and transparency rests with the councils. It's not a responsibility of the MEC for Gauteng or the provincial government. Because when things goes wrong, sometimes people will conveniently want to put the blame on the provincial government or the MEC, when in fact the responsibility rests with those who have been elected. Because as you know, councillors are accountable to the citizens because they are voted for by the citizens. So we must make sure in working with them, helping and supporting them, that they exercise their responsibilities and obligations as required by the Constitution. And that's why the drafters of our Constitution have also made provisions in the event that they don't exercise their responsibilities in line with the Constitution, that there can be an intervention by the provincial or national government. And that's why on a day-to-day basis, they must exercise those responsibilities. The MEC of Gauteng will not be in any municipality to force them exercise their responsibilities.
Does that mean?
However,
does that mean that you don't have levers at all? In other words, you have nothing that you can leverage on that says that even that gives you some kind of power to be able to make some meaningful interventions as an MEC when the problems are so recurring and there are no consequences and so on?
We've got the responsibility to provide support, and that's what we do. That's why in the province of Gauteng, we've decided to be proactive, because there's a section in the Constitution, section 154, which obliges or rather places an obligation on the province to provide support. And support, it's simply that, support, not running or taking over.
What sort of things do you do, for instance, or would you give a municipality and call support?
I'm getting to that. One of the things we do, we have dedicated a team of senior managers in every municipality to work with them on different aspects: financial management, supply chain, HR, service delivery. But as I'm saying, the mayor of a municipality with their mayoral committee and the councillors, they must take responsibility and they must exercise, because remember, they are getting paid to do that. So our officials are merely giving them support. And at the end of the day, decisions rest with the council. And that's why the Constitution was deliberate and explicit and clear that the executive and legislative authority lies with the council. When you go to the province, national, it is phrased differently. It says that the executive authority of a province lies with the premier and his executive, and the legislative authority lies with the provincial parliament, what is known as the legislature. And it states clearly what is expected of the different what is it, the arms of the state, if I call it that. So in the municipality, it's not different. Municipalities are not stepchilds or junior partners of the provincial government. The constitution clearly states what is it that they must do. And we have to emphasize that they must do their responsibilities. And that's why where they don't, we can come in and intervene, like we did in Tshwane, as you remember. We have done in Mfuleni, we have done in the West Rand District Municipality. And that is the last resort, because we don't want to run municipalities. It is not sustainable. It is a huge burden, because we've got our own responsibilities that we must execute. Okay. We acted in Tshwane when the municipality was dysfunctional. And in fact, we were vindicated by the Concord, contrary to popular belief, because the judgment of the Concord agrees with the provincial government that the council was dysfunctional.
Let me see.
However, yes.
Sorry to barge. We have run out of time, and we have an obligation.